Freedom is something that we hear about nearly every day, but what does it really mean? Some people have given up their lives to protect the freedom of others, while others have actually killed to suppress it. And specifically looking at freedom of speech, is it something that we should encourage or treat with caution? Join me for real stories, real issues, and real views. This is Real Talk. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another edition of Real Talk. On today's show, we're going to be looking at freedom of speech, both the advantages and the dangers of it. Now, it's a topic which increasingly more and more people are talking about, and the communities are facing, trying to balance out the pros and cons. We'll be having a look at both sides of the story today, and to help me do that, I've got an expert panel with me in the studio. Reveal Saab, if I could start with you. Reveal Bukharov Saab, welcome to Real Talk. He's a writer and former BBC radio journalist. Assalamu alaikum, it's good to have you on the show today. Next, I'm joined by Qudsi Rashid. Assalamu alaikum, welcome to Real Talk. Qudsi is a human rights lawyer and formerly a lecturer on free speech. And finally, we have Waqar Amini Saab. Assalamu alaikum, welcome to Real Talk. Waqar Saab's been on the show before, and he's a religious affairs writer. So to my panel, assalamu alaikum, welcome to the show. Also, we're joined by a small studio audience here as well. Reveal Saab, if I could turn to you first. We're discussing freedom of speech today, but where did it actually evolve from? Where did the whole notion of freedom of speech come from?
Well, you see, it's a quite an important question, actually, whether freedom of speech was a God-given right to a man or not, or it's something which was invented by a liberal society. I think that in the importance of the freedom of speech, as we discussed before here, is the main importance is not that it's a human right per se, or that it's a part of the liberal society, democratic society per se, but without the freedom of speech, you can never attain to truth.
Right, okay.
And this is the most important thing here. The truth is about free speech, and free speech about truth. What else? Secondary things come here. But now I remember being at the BBC once. I went to make a report on this demonstration at Trafalgar Square about the Danish caricatures on the Holy Prophet. And I was making this small report, and I was asking people what they think. They were very intelligent British men, and I asked him what he thinks. He said, I have perfect right to insult their religion, speaking of Islam. This I remember for 5 or 6 years now, that he has a perfect right to insult my religion. And this is how he thinks about it. He was nice otherwise, a very, very nice man and very intelligent man. And I was thinking whether it is really his right. And thinking of it, indeed, there is nothing in the constitutional laws of this land to preclude him from doing so, except for a moral code, but then the moral code is different for different societies and different men. This is first thing, just to warm up the discussion. And secondly, you remember, I was born in the Soviet Union, in a country where free speech was kind of at a very short supply in those days. And in the 1990 or a little bit later, I went to Barbados first. And then I met this American man who was teaching me about free speech and about all things democratic.
Right. Okay.
And I was a bit tired of it because he was really doing it, with all his zeal and so forth. And I said, well, okay, I understand what you're talking about, free speech. But then again, in my opinion, free speech is something is defined, but what you are prepared to pay for it.
Right, okay.
And with what?
Yeah.
For example, I told him, well, okay, of course I can go, and say that the American president is not what I like about him. It's all right. But I say, why don't you go to your manager, line manager, and with all your might of your free speech, just tell him what you think about him.
And see what the reaction
And see what the reaction will be.
Yeah.
And he understood, and he stopped teaching me because he understood for the first time that it's not the free speech is the key here, but what I are prepared to pay, what you're set to sacrifice for it. Okay. And this is also a very, very important question. Because when you're abusing free speech, meaning that you're abusing this, which is behind that.
We'll touch on that later on in the program.
Just adding to that point, I mean, if you look at the past and the way that these things used to happen, the mentality of countries was, or states or situations was you do what you're told, and that's it. I'm in power, I'm telling you this is the way it is, and this is the way it is. There's no opportunity for debate or discussion. So when you think about free expression, there's essentially two elements to it that come out from the past. There's the right for you to say what you want to say, but there's also the right for you to listen to what other people say. And that's precisely the point I think Ravil Sahib is making, is that everyone has a claim to truth. I say I'm right, you say you're right. The only way that you're going to know and be able to decide who's right is if you allow people to say what they want to say, and you use your own moral judgment to choose which one of those ones you want to do.
Picking up on the terminology used, I hear about freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of thought. Are they all, linked, or what are the sort of subtle differences between those?
They're definitely linked. I mean, freedom of thought is slightly different because freedom of thought is an internal concept. You can't change how my brain is wired up and what I'm doing. You can influence it, you can't change it. So it's much more protected, what's called freedom of thought or conscience. Free expression and free speech are generally used interchangeably. Free speech technically is slightly more narrow. It's what I'm doing now. It's the spoken word. Free expression tends to cover any form of expression, so speech or art or drama or any form of behaviour. I choose to wear red rather than yellow.
And you're expressing yourself through that.
Precisely.
Okay, I understand. Waqar Sahib, just turning to you, why is it important to have free speech, just generally? Why are some people prepared to, give up so much just to actually get that free speech in society?
Put simply, I think, is so that society can progress, and at the same time for human beings to also develop as human beings. I think the importance of the freedom of expression is something that's recognized internationally, and to the extent that even in the United Nations Charter of Human Rights, there are a couple of articles where it's clearly stated that it is a valuable human right, it's a sacred human right, and so does the European Convention of Human Rights say exactly the same. So it's valuable in the context of it allowing human beings to converse with each other, for information to be disseminated, for knowledge to spread, and this is where obviously the media has a very important part to play as well.
All right, let's just open it up to the audience. Looking at freedom of speech in a very general view, what's your understanding of freedom of speech and how important do you think it is? Tasif Sahib, if you'd like to add something?
I certainly think that freedom of speech or freedom of expression, as it is said, is certainly a privilege. It's a privilege in this society, in open society, in democratic society, in the West. But as all privileges, the society must understand that every privilege comes with a responsibility. For example, authority comes with a responsibility that will not be abused. Majority comes with a responsibility that will not be used to impose an undue will on the minority. And a freedom of expression comes with the responsibility that will not be used to malign others or for hate speech. So in a sense, that is where the society goes wrong. For everything else, they say, yeah, there's a responsibility. But when it comes to freedom of speech, then everything goes. They say you can say anything you want to anyone and at any time.
Yeah. Okay. Let's get one more point.
You see, one of the difficulties that I have with this whole concept is that how do you define it at any given time? And as has been mentioned by the panel, in different countries, they define it at different times according to how a very small group will create the definitions. We can look at it in a bigger way as well, that we're living in the 21st century. Even humanity as a whole today might define the limits of freedom of speech, whereas 200 years ago, people living at that time may have felt, or even further back in the past, going even to ancient times, humanity at that time may have also defined their limits, which would be quite different to now. But at that time, they may have felt that they were a progressive society, and they may have evidence to show for that. Whereas today, we are changing the borders as we see fit. And does the panel have any comment on whether there is a kind of universal way of defining this that is separate, that can be separated from any given group or any given time or
How would the
nation?
panel respond to that? Could see if you got it?
Yeah, I mean, just picking up on that point, it's one of the most difficult questions in philosophy is, are things fixed in time and space, or is everything relative and subjective? And I think neither of those positions are totally correct. I think if you look at simply history, you would see that, well, truth is a cherished value whether you go back 2,000 years or you exist now, whether you look in the West, the East, the South, the North. Truth is a valued, cherished principle. How it's applied and understood may vary. So I think you're right in what you're saying. I mean, and there's numerous examples of that if you look at how it plays out. For example, in many countries which, for example, suffered hugely as a result of what happened in the Second World War, there are specific provisions that prevent people from denying the Holocaust. A restriction on freedom of expression, which doesn't exist in a country which is more tangential to that, like the United Kingdom. Similarly, in South Africa, in the post-apartheid constitution, there's a specific provision which says free speech does not extend to racial hatred. Why? Because you look at the context of apartheid. I think you're totally right in saying that context is important, but at the same time, that shouldn't deny us and prevent us from looking at what the general overarching principles and values are.
So the legal stance has actually changed from country to country about what is freedom of speech and...
But based on the same principles.
I mean, turning to modern society now, do you think those same issues are apparent in modern society?
Absolutely, it's the same. Because once you try to stop the river, it will go around something.
Bakar, how would you respond to that? I mean, do you agree with what Raveil Saab's point there?
Absolutely. I think it's correct to put in the context of history as well. I think there is one particular incident from history that's come to mind, which I think it is important to put into context in terms of making us understand how we've got to the free society that we do enjoy around the world today. And it was in the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him himself, in which he held a dialogue with Christians in his own mosque. And there is this common misconception in the world today that you can't have a dialogue, let alone express your point of view in an Islamic context if it differs from the Quran. And unfortunately, over time, and this is where, unfortunately, where the church or the medievalist clerics took over, and there was one truth that everyone had to subscribe to, otherwise you were classified as a third-class citizen. And because of that, religion is perceived as being very intolerant, very backward, and something that does belong to the past. This is the way in which...
But I mean, from Raveil Saab's earlier point, what he seems to be saying is that the reason people have put a limit on free speech is because if everything is just open, it's very difficult to actually agree on one point. There are going to be there's going to be a huge spectrum of views. And actually, we find to regulate people, you have to put a limit on free speech and give it certain boundaries. Qudsi, what would...
Yeah, there's two things I want to say to that. I'm just picking up from what Gar was saying. When it comes to truth, I think there's three things about why it's important to allow everything, right? Whether it's true or not, because you can't say ex ante, you can't say before you know what the thing is, whether or not it's true, because there are competing claims to the truth. Now, the first thing is as soon as you try to suppress something, all that will happen is you drive it underground and you'll make it even more appealable. Right? You'll make it much more appealing. If you say to someone, you can't say that, I'm not going to let you say that, they'll want to say it even more, and other people will say, well, why is that person not allowed to say that? What's he saying? It will make things much more attractive. Okay. The second reason is that if you are required to defend what you believe in and what you think is true, you will hold that dear. This was the problem of what happened in medieval Christianity and with Islam, is that because there was only one answer, there was no need for you to stand up and say, but this is the reason why I believe in God, and this is the reason why I believe that Muhammad was a prophet, or that Jesus was son of God, or whatever it was that you believe. You didn't have to defend that because there was no need for you to. What resulted from that is complacency. People don't know why they believe what they believe. It's just all that they know. So that's the second reason. And the third reason is that we just don't know what the right answer is. And it comes out of the point that was made, is that things change over time. New things happen, new prophets come, new answers come, new technology comes. How do we know what's right if there may be something out there that might be right? And unless we let the person make the claim to what's right, we can't know whether or not it in fact is right.
Okay, all right, fantastic. So coming to the audience, we've heard a lot of points from the panel. How do we actually relate that to our everyday lives, modern day society as well? Let's see, you've got a point.
I think if everyone was free to do what they want and what they say, there wouldn't be a need of a leader. Especially in this society, if there is a leader and he's telling you that this is wrong and this is right, but inside I'm thinking, no, I'm free to do what I want, then there's no purpose of that leader. To progress, there has to be rules and regulations within freedom of speech as well.
And yeah, go on, please. Like that.
So just picking up on a couple of points raised there, and you touched upon regulation a bit earlier, which I'm not sure we've actually covered just yet. Everyone agrees that people should be free to express themselves, to share their opinion. Nowadays, with people all across the world, you post a little video on YouTube, it goes international, it's global. Yeah. But even in this country, we have rules and regulations when it comes to practicing free speech. We have the Press Complaints Commission, for example, and that's been established for a few years. Editors have to follow a very strict code of conduct. Okay. So they are told of certain limitations as long as there's no direct intrusion into somebody's private life, or if there is no allegation that's made against somebody that it doesn't have some kind of premise or basis to it.
In terms of this code of conduct, who actually decides what goes into that? How do they define where the rules are and where they lie?
It's almost like a collective agreement amongst people in that profession. And one of the clauses in the Press Complaints Commission is that they have to be committed to maintain very high professional standards. Okay. And there's an agreement as to what that means. So yes, freedom of information, the public has a right to know certain things, obviously, but there are limitations that even editors do recognize. And if they do cross the line, and many have done, it works against them. Many newspapers have been on record as having paid ridiculous amounts of money in damages.
Right.
So it suits them, and it's in their interest to make sure that they remain within the confines of the law.
Okay. I mean, because we're talking about legal aspects, if I can bring you into discussion here, from a legal perspective, what are the sort of boundaries within freedom of speech?
I think the first thing, just before answering that question, I'm not evading it. Just before answering that question, I think the most important thing in my mind when conceiving of this debate is a separation of the law from morality.
Okay, so they're two completely...
They're two completely spheres. They're very, obviously very closely linked. Law is influenced by morality, and morality is influenced by law. But what I mean by that is it's one thing to say that the state is allowed to stop someone from doing something, is a separate question from saying a particular person should not exercise his right in a particular manner. Okay. So, for example, it's one thing to say, I have a right to lie. The state should not come and put me in prison if I lie to my mother about how well I did on my exam, right? It's not something the state should come and interfere with. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a morally good thing for me to lie in that situation. So what we need to ask is the first question about in what areas can the state be entitled to stop someone from speaking? That's, I think, for me, the first question that you have to ask. And the second question is, well, even if the state doesn't stop you from speaking, surely there must be some sort of code of conduct or a moral code or some sort of responsibility out there that says, wait a moment, you have this right, but should you really be saying that? Yeah. That's the way I think the debate should be conceived.
Okay. Waqas, I'm just turning to you. I mean, we've talked about the various advantages, disadvantages. Surely the person's right to, not be... not have people say things against them that could potentially harm them. Surely that right should be much higher in value than the person's right for freedom of speech. What's the balance there?
There are pros and cons to that. It is a very strong line of argument to have. If we can maybe take one recent case as an example, where that is the line of argument given. Salman Rushdie, very famous author, has written a number of books which are under the guise of being works of fiction, but even by his own admission, there are certain themes that he would promote which are clearly geared towards undermining Islam and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, you could argue that as Islam does allow him, he has the right to say these things. He has the right to mock anything or anyone that he wants. Whether it's the right thing or not, whether it's the decent thing to do or not, as a rational human being is a separate matter. But for the state to not just to allow that to happen, but to celebrate his achievement, as he was. When he was knighted for his literary works. Whether he would have been knighted if he'd spent an entire lifetime maligning the monarchy, I very much doubt. So there's another question to be explored there, perhaps. But you're absolutely right. Many Muslims were offended by not just what he had written, but the fact that the state had almost publicly patted him on the back. Yeah, almost well done, congratulations, carry on the good work. And that's the message that people get. And there is this argument that says that, well, just as writers or artists, or anyone for that matter, a philosopher, a politician can say what they want, and they have a right to do it, shouldn't the victims of their criticism also have the right to have their sentiments protected? And that is another area altogether.
Yeah, I mean, because just turning to you, I mean, looking at it from an Islamic perspective, it seems recently there's been so many attacks on Islam, whether it's the Salman Rushdie or Geert Wilders. We've heard about the caricatures as well that we've mentioned as well. You know, in those examples, the way they seem to actually benefit it from it and say that the way they can get away with it, if you like, is because they have the freedom of speech to put out what they want. And how the issues that have arisen in the media has been the Islamic reaction from that. It's been, you know, way over the top, some people would say. So, I mean, how would you respond to that?
It's the point about sentiments. I mean, it perplexes me a little bit to have all this attachment to my feelings and my sentiments. And you gave the example of Muslim sentiments. I mean, are we such cowards? Are we such so unable to speak and stand up and defend ourselves that we have to either go and stand in a corner or sit around and moan and complain, or look at what these people are doing to us, or not be able to express ourselves, so we go and burn flags and we go and throw dustbins around? I mean, is that a civilized behavior? No, it isn't. I mean, the first point on the sentiments really is this, is that if we were going to limit speech on the basis of sentiments, none of us would say anything. Yeah. I mean, how many times have you been offended by your family, your brothers or your sisters or your parents or people you work with? Everyone disagrees. Disagreement is a positive thing. Okay. The key thing is how you express it and how you behave. And it's the point that you're totally right, Ravil Saab, in saying it's not so much the speech or the content of the speech, it's the behavior and the intent with which it's done. And there's nothing to stop Muslims standing up and saying, well, actually, and this is all the more so if we truly believe that what we're saying is right. What's to stop us standing up and saying, well, actually, what you're saying is wrong. Yeah. And these are the reasons why you're saying it's wrong. But and not only is it wrong...
It's the way that they need to express
precisely,
that.
And not only is it wrong, but I'm telling you it's wrong, and I'm doing it in a dignified manner, showing you that actually your behavior of insulting me, I'm not going to rise to that behavior. Yeah. I'm going to act with a certain degree of decorum and respect and proper conduct and show you actually, not only am I right, but I'm showing you that my behavior is right as well.
Fantastic. Let me move to the audience. I mean, us as Muslims, how do we present ourselves in a way that, if there are examples where we do disagree, how do we actually present that disagreement? Have you got something you'd like to add to that?
Point made by Qudsi Saab there is interesting, because you could say that when I'm offended as a Muslim, then I choose to behave in a dignified way. Now, the question is, where did I get that code of conduct from in itself? That I've got because I subscribe to a system that has presented, that I feel is more rational than anything else. So that's my choice. Okay. Whereas other people, that's not necessary. I can't sit here and say that is something that anybody can take on, because it depends whether they've had access to that information, what their feelings are, how that's been presented to them in itself. So, the Muslims or whoever, if they react to Salman Rushdie or anything in a violent way or whatever, it's not a question of I'm trying to justify it, but it's a question of what do they understand about how they should act, who is actually educating them and how they should respond to these things.
I just want to get some more views as well. Mansoor, what do you think about what we've been discussing and protecting people's sentiments and their feelings?
Well, obviously, in terms of freedom of speech, one has to be obviously very careful of what is being said, because you would be obviously hurting somebody's feelings, somebody's belief. You have the right to speak openly, but one has to make sure that take the aspects and take views in consideration that does not harm or hurt anybody else's feelings.
I just want to take one more point of view. Amir, have you got something you'd like to just add to that?
I wanted to just mention about the idea about truth and the fact that freedom of speech, from my own opinion, freedom of speech is about looking for truth. Right. You can have someone propagate something about somebody to a detriment, and the only way you can counter that is by in a dignified manner, expressing truth. And then the question comes, who defines what truth is when there are differing factors? And I think the gentleman next to me had a very good point, is that leadership of some sort needs to be in place. And from my own opinion, the only leadership that would be valid to be sort of the governing decision, or the governing body behind defining what the truth is to have a leader and to have a spiritual one.
Okay. Question though. How do you choose who your leader is?
You don't choose
No, I mean, if you're a person sitting in a country, let's say, there's 5 different leaders. How do you know which one?
Well, you look at the actions that speak louder than their words, and you match the words that they say. So it's very important to look at what the person is propagating as well as what the person is doing.
Yeah, and the point that I'm trying to bring out there is that there's almost a danger with the leadership concept. I mean, I'm not taking away from it. There's a danger of saying, I have a leader and that's it. We've got to be very careful not to think, in my opinion, to say, well, you follow things blindly, right? Blindness is not a good thing. We all know that. We like our eyes. So even when there's leadership, you have to choose your leadership wisely in the first place. Some people are born into following a particular leader. Yep. They have to decide from themselves at some point in their life, is this what they're going to continue to do? Yep. Other people will question things. And the value of questioning is not a bad thing. Questioning is a good thing because, like we've said, it's only through questioning that you can discover new truths and new ideas and that you can hold your own ideas stronger. Yep. That's why things should be questioned.
I just need to stop the discussion there. We're just going to take a quick break. But we'll carry on afterwards as well. And join us for the second half of the program where we're going to be focusing a bit more on the media and what role that has to play within this, the whole issue of freedom of speech. So we'll be back in just a minute.
वक्त था वक्त मसीहा न किसी और का वक्त था वक्त मसीहा न किसी और का वक्त मैं ना आता तो कोई और ही आया होता मैं ना आता तो कोई और ही आया होता जिंदाबाद जिंदाबाद अहमदियत जिंदाबाद अहमदियत जिंदाबाद अहमदियत जिंदाबाद अहमदियत जिंदाबाद अहमदियत जिंदाबाद
Welcome back to part 2. Today we're looking at freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and looking at the pros and cons, trying to find a whole holistic view around the topic. And right now we're going to focus on the media and what role that has as well. Vikas, I'm turning to you. Obviously you've written in local media as well. As a journalist, if you'd like to call yourself that, as a writer, surely you have a huge responsibility regarding freedom of speech.
Absolutely correct. And again, it's a right, in a sense that I have to write, with a W this time, but again with responsibility. Mentioned earlier on about the Press Complaints Commission, there is a code of conduct that newspapers and everyone in the media has to follow in order to not overstep the mark. Freedom of information, everyone has the right to know, the public has a right to know, right. And it's a responsibility of people in the media to spread that knowledge and information. But
what do they have the right to know? I mean, there's people's own privacy, for example, that sometimes they feel their privacy is being, intruded into. So where do the boundaries lie? What information is sort of counts within that
there are certain contexts that you're not allowed to step into. An example being, for example, taking photographs of somebody in the privacy of their own home without their consent, as an example.
I mean, we hear so much about celebrity complaining about that their freedom of privacy is being invaded into.
The privacy point is an interesting one, because what we have here, and it's something we've not touched upon yet, is that there's consistently, with any form of political, legal, philosophical thought, what we're dealing with here is a conflict of interests, values, and principles. You've got things flying around all over the place. You've got privacy rights, you've got truth, you've got free expression, you've got equality, non-discrimination. You've got all these things that we all like and that we all want lots of. But how do we reconcile them when they come into conflict with each other? So, for example, if my particular politician was committing adultery, let's say, I think I would be entitled to know, even though it might breach his privacy rights, because it's important that I have a decision about who's going to be running my life, that I know their personality. Okay. Whereas if my next-door neighbour is committing adultery, do I necessarily have a right to it? Well, probably not. So what we have here is a situation where we've got various different things that we like, and we're trying to balance them and reconcile them.
I was just going to pick up on that point. It's been mentioned earlier in the programme about free speech in the media generally, as we're discussing right now. And we mentioned earlier on that what is the role of, or why is free speech valued? It's to spread information, it's to spread knowledge.
Okay.
Nowadays, what we see is through the media that what should be freedom of speech to educate is really freedom of speech to entertain and to slander, if anything. Why? Because the way that the media has become now, it's all about ratings. It's about which newspaper can be the most successful, which TV channel is the most viewed. It's very much competition-based. And in order to grab attention, and it's really freedom of speech to grab attention, that's what it's really become.
But Reveal Sahib, you've got experience within the BBC. I mean, you don't write stories just for entertainment, you do it to educate, don't you, surely? There's, when we just mentioned this code of conduct and there's certain rules to stop that from happening.
Well, the media works, you know, with one principle. Good news is no news.
Right, okay.
So you need bad news in order to entertain people and to make them watch something.
Okay.
And in this respect, you know, whatever we see, it's not an objective thing. It is picked up for the ratings. It's picked up for the, you know, commercials, for the price of commercials and so forth. And so we can't say that it is absolutely, for example, again, look at what's happening in Russia now. Russian television was once, you know, Soviet television, everything was very good there, very nice and so forth, you know, just very rosy. Now everything is absolutely night black. You can't find the proper normal program just to sit and be quiet and, you know, watch and to pick something.
Right.
You're always being, you know, being frightened with something. Why? Well, one thing is somebody sitting there, he wants to do this and wants to spoil the society and wants to make it bad. Well, I'm not into this, I'm not buying into this. But I know that the kind of, you know, commercially driven television is that by definition at the end. If there is nothing to stop it, and here we have some safeguards, of course, in Britain.
So, I mean, you're talking about television. Obviously, it's driven by audience ratings as well.
No,
potentially.
No, yes.
It's about getting people to watch the shows. I mean, we've got people here. I just want to move to the audience now to get their view. Do you feel that you're being force-fed information? Maybe that's what they're saying here, that you're being given these things to actually listen to and pick up on. To see if you'd like to just.
I would think so, because I'll give my own example. I read the newspapers daily, and I watch BBC. In the newspapers, what I've seen is when you read it, you sometimes feel that there's kind of a bias. For example, you will see news, for example, 40 people will die in Russia, it will not be reported.
Right, okay.
But some 70-year-old guy would marry a 12-year-old girl in Morocco, it will be like the second-page news.
Right.
Why is that? Is there a plan to actually malign Islam or Muslims? And good news, for example, if there is the largest Muslim gathering in UK, which is the Jalsa Salana of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, it's never on television or on in the newspapers. Why is that? And then you start questioning, is this the media that is driving it, or the people want that kind of news?
Yeah, no, coming on to that point.
Let me just take a few more points from the audience first, and then we'll come back to you. I mean, you've got something you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to actually just give a different point of view on the whole thing, and that is that I think that the media doesn't seek to give us the truth so much as seek to gain money. What Reveal Sahib said earlier about humility, I think on their part, they want to sell. And what sells is controversy, bad news, someone that's done something bad. And it's their responsibility that they're not rising to, that they're not adhering to. However, it's twofold, because it's our responsibility to not be drawn to that. Because if we...
That's the fundamental problem. It's all very well saying that, but the media tells us this. But if it's all done on competition, right? If the media does publish things that are things that people are not interested in, they won't sell. The question for me is not so much the kind of conspiracy theories about how we're being manipulated by the media. It's about us. And I mean, if we're interested in what prurient things that people are up to or what they're doing in the privacy of their own homes, much more than we're interested in seeking truth, that's what the media will give us, because
we have the choice to make these decisions, don't we, of what sort of...
And I mean, it's the we as society, and it comes back, I can't remember, I think someone there said the point earlier, and it's just, in the break, I've been mulling over it a little bit and thinking that really it all comes down to this point about having a purpose.
Okay, yeah.
If you have a purpose, everything fits into that. I mean, it's this idea that everything that you're doing is in order to achieve a purpose, whatever that purpose may be. Right. I mean, if we take truth as our particular purpose, and we, the society, the media, everyone has that in mind, then you've got a direction within which you're going.
I mean, that's an interesting point, because throughout the whole series, I mean, we discuss a whole range of issues. And something that's always common that comes through is that, you know, there are issues. It's down to your choice. You can go with this choice, you can go with that choice, but it depends on your purpose. It depends where you're trying to go to, and that's your sort of defining thing.
Because if you don't have a purpose, right, if you say that, well, I don't care about God, I don't care about, I mean, what's going to happen or anything like that. I'm a good person. I accept that I'm a good person, or I've got a secular, even a secular atheistic approach to morality, and I'm going to be a good person. What's wrong with being interested in things that are prurient, or things that are malignant, or things that are nasty? What's wrong with it? It titillates me, it excites me, it makes me interested. It appeals to the basest of humanity, which is always the easiest route to go down. I mean, we know from ourselves, I mean, it's much easier to be lazy than it is to be hardworking. It's much easier to be interested in things that are bad for you than things that are good for you. It's just the way that human beings are for whatever function.
It's good that I'm safe, whatever happening there, I'm safe. This is important.
Precisely. And so if that's all that you care about you feeling some sort of satisfaction, then that's the reason that all these things are...
One thing we touched on a bit earlier, sorry, just to interrupt, I mean, we talked about hurting people's sentiments.
So I've got a shaking of the head there from what I said.
We'll go back to Tayyab a bit later on. I'm sure he's got something to add to that. But we're talking about people's sentiments and hurting feelings and how to express them the right way. For example, if you're seeing something in the media or, you know, in the newspaper or on TV, and you are offended by it, especially from the legal perspective, for us as individuals, what rights do we have to actually say that this has offended me and I want something done about that? Can you give us some sort of legal
rights?
Yeah.
Again, it comes back to responsibility when it comes to people that have reacted or responded in a certain way to something that does offend them or does insult them.
Yeah.
We have touched upon the freedom of speech being employed to serve a good purpose, or it could be employed to serve a negative purpose.
Okay.
We see nowadays, in order to grab attention, because of the ratings environment that we have in the world today, it's used not to inspire so much, it's used to incite hatred. It's not used to educate or to enlighten, it's used to offend and insult. Now, in order to know how to respond to certain things that are said that might offend us, the example that we have is the seal of the prophets, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And contrary to popular perception again, we know that the Quran constantly, in fact, it challenges people to, if they claim to have truth, to be in possession of truth, it says, well, if you have the evidence, provide it.
Present it, yeah, that's right.
And it provides the perfect soil in which that dialogue and that interaction can take place, hence the success of Islamic Spain, which followed. And again, it's not a question of just having freedom of information to debate and to aspire to reach the truth with a capital T, as we were mentioning earlier. How did the Prophet respond when he was attacked or when he was criticized? And we have a beautiful example from his life where who became known as the chief of the hypocrites, who spent his entire life undermining the Prophet, maligning him, ridiculing him.
Right.
And the Prophet put up with it. Didn't say a word. And what happened at the time that the chief of the hypocrites passed away? The Prophet led his funeral prayer.
That's correct, yeah. And
there was a companion who tried to stop the Prophet to lead this funeral prayer because he said, this is a person who mocked you, who undermined you, and just challenged everything that you stood for.
That's right, yeah.
And even if you were to seek forgiveness from him for him 70 times, God wouldn't forgive him. And what did the Prophet say? If I have to pray more than 70 times, I'll do it.
Yeah.
And that's the example that he gave. And we see very similar examples throughout Islamic history as well.
Yeah. I mean, just recently, I mean, we had the episode with the whole Danish cartoons, and then the issue of freedom of speech came about and inciting religious hatred and things like that as well. So
Muslims are offended with these things. Just as a Sikh would be offended if Guru Nanak is attacked, just as Christians would be offended if Jesus or Mary have been criticized, it's a natural response. And for religious people and believers especially, these personalities are more dear to them than even our own parents.
Yeah.
And it's natural for you to feel offense if your mum or your dad has been attacked. It's natural. It's a natural response. Even more so when it's a prophet. But it doesn't mean we are justified in taking a violent course of action in response. Of course we're not. Yes, our feelings are affected, they're hurt, but there is a certain way of responding. So when Salman Rushdie wrote a book, the perfect response was to write a book in response to it.
Right.
If you're attacked with a pen, you respond with the pen. Simple as that.
Raveel Sartuni, I mean, shouldn't the journalists who publish those cartoons have some sort of, responsibility, and shouldn't they have thought, actually, we shouldn't have published this?
If a person doesn't have responsibility, how you tell him that to have one?
Okay.
You see, in this response, I think he's not kind of pretending that he has this right. He really believes that he has the right to mock everything around him. Well, again, how you respond to this. Again, I remember one hadith when I think this Abu Bakr Siddiq was there with the Holy Prophet ﷺ, and somebody came there to mock and to insult Abu Bakr. And he was insulting him for so long, and the Prophet was sitting there ﷺ, and just smiling. And once Abu Bakr, broke his silence, opened his mouth to answer to this person.
That's right.
Prophet stood up and went away. And Abu Bakr asked him, what was the reason? Yeah. What was it? Once this person was insulting me with all the names, and you were sitting there and smiling, and when I started to kind of rebuke this, you went. And the Holy Prophet, he said that, well, when he was keeping silence in response to his insults, the angels were answering for you. Once you opened your mouth, the Satan came, and the Prophet can't see where that Satan is, and he went away. Isn't that the beautifulest thing there can be in all this? When whosoever he is, insults you or what you hold dear, and you see that whatever you say to him won't affect him anyway, why not just keep silence? Let angels answer for you.
Yeah. And at the same time, we've talked a lot about how Muslims react when they're attacked, or if their sentiments have been affected or hurt. There's also a lesson that Muslims are given in order to ensure that other people's sensitivities are honored and respected. I mean, the greatest sin in Islam is shirk, is worshipping more than one God. But even the Quran instructs believers, do not revile, do not mock the gods of others.
Right, okay. You have to have some sort of respect for them as well. Yeah?
Absolutely. So you need to respect others because of their belief and their traditions. And this is where Islam does stand out from the rest of the world religions.
Just on that point, I want to bring the audience back into this. We're talking about Muslims, how they react as well, but you're a group of Muslims yourself. So how do you feel, and how do you actually put those feelings into actions when maybe your sentiments aren't hurt? See, would you like to just comment on that?
The example that Ravi Saab gave is fantastic. Our training as Ahmadi Muslims is, if we are abused to that level, that we stay quiet and we recite Durood Sharif. If you go to YouTube and you see some clips of these Lahore bombings that took place, and there's some really shocking material there. You see people who are injured with gunshot wounds, and the guy is videoing it on his mobile phone, and you can hear firing and explosions in the background. They are sitting in silence, reciting Durood Sharif. So this is well beyond freedom of expression. This is freedom to live is being encroached upon. And they sat and suffered that with great dignity. So if the example, that is an extreme example that we've seen recently. So as Muslims, that is the example that we should be showing, not just as Ahmadi Muslims, but Muslims of any sect of Islam. Yep. Because this is the example of the Prophet and his followers. Okay. Sorry. If I can just rewind just a little bit to the panel. I have the young gentleman at the front. He asked a question earlier on, and I don't feel that he quite got the answer. And I want to restate his question.
The point about freedom of speech being different in different countries.
Yeah,
is that what
he said that in Pakistan you have the extreme control of the freedom of speech, the extent that blasphemy laws are designed to segregate and oppress segments of their own society. In the States, the laws are such that even the president himself is powerless to stop a man from offending an entire segment of humanity, which is Islam.
Let's find out what the panel have in response to that.
The way I see it is this. There's two layers. There's two layers that we need to think about. There's the first layer of what the law should do. And in that approach, I personally would favour the situation in the United States. I think the law, the state, the power of the authority and control should be minimal in controlling what people do. The only time it should step in is when there's actual social disorder. Offence is not enough, in my opinion. People should be offended. They've got other ways to deal with that. It's if there's going to be violence, if they're going to be prevented from exercising their rights, if they're going to be harmed, there should be a thing. But then there's a second layer. And I think this is what, I mean, if we call it neoliberalism rather than liberalism. But what neoliberalism has, in my opinion, engendered is an abdication of moral responsibility. So you only look at, I've got a right to do this, and that's the end of the story. The second layer, and this is what the Sharia gives, because it covers both what the law should do and what you as a moral agent should do. The second layer it points to is this moral responsibility. So what would happen in an ideal, the ideal solution would be I'm entitled to say what I want to offend 20% of the population, but I'm going to exercise my moral responsibility not to. And if I'm one of those people that disagree with those 20% of the rest of the world, what I will do is I will exercise my right in a manner that's dignified. And it's the word, I mean, it's the word you use, dignity. And I think that sums it all up.
It's about opening and having a mature discussion and debate. I think that has to be the overriding factor. We're going to be wrapping up shortly. I just want to get one or two...
Just add something to this question. Again, we have a very, very good example here. The Quran says, speak to them in the way which is best.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
You see, for each and every society, there shouldn't be one version of not only freedom of speech, of democracy as such, because some societies are such, some are different, there are different culturally, mentally. And one thing which is, ripe and ready for one society is not ready. For example, in Africa, you have a tribe where the chief is a father figure. You can't really criticize him in a way that politicians are being criticized in this country because it will be wrong. Okay. It will be wrong for the society. Yep. And in this respect, we must speak in the way which is best, and the best is in the context.
Okay, that's a good point. We're just a bit short on time. I want to get one or two final points. There's some people in the audience who haven't had a chance to speak. Have you got some... Just looking at the whole discussion that we've had today, I mean, how does freedom of speech affect you, and what would you like to say? I think
just summing it up for what we've all just been talking about is we came up with the idea that the basic freedom of speech as a basic concept should be adopted by everyone. It is a positive thing. However, to use it against somebody or in the wrong way and not having limitations on it because you can use it to abuse and affect another person's life. Obviously, at the same way you can use physical abuse. But a question I have quickly is that physical abuse, you can make rules about it, because obviously if you break somebody's arm, it's obvious. But abusing somebody mentally is subjective to their
It's hard to judge
needs.
how much you've...
So if I say to you, if I say something to you, it might be offensive to you, but to another person, they might not be offended. So how do we judge that? It's a grey area in kind of...
Okay, let's just get one more point and then we'll move to the panel. How have you found the discussion today? What do you think has been the most important aspects of it to take away?
Well, freedom of speech is really important, and everyone has the right to have the freedom of speech. But until a certain border, you should be able to speak. There's a limit of everything, right? And as soon as you cross the limit in a good way, that's right. But as soon as you cross it in a bad way, as we see in Pakistan, then that's where the freedom of speech is no longer freedom of speech. Like the Maulvis, for example, they're allowed to say whatever they want, but they don't realize that Ahmadis all around the world are being persecuted because of what they say. And on the other hand, we see Khalifatul Masih, Hazur, in nearly every khutbah Jummah, he says nearly the same thing, that we should pray for all Muslims. We should pray for those Maulvis, that they come on the right track. There's two extremes. There's the extremes that Muslims should be killed, Wajibul Qatl, and there's the Khalifa, who's given the extreme love, that although they persecute us, although I'm not allowed to stay in that country, but we still pray for them.
Exactly. No,
so the freedom of speech, there's the extreme of good and there's the extreme of bad. Okay. And we have the right to choose.
Sorry, that's a really nice point to end on as well. Turning to the panel, we've had a good discussion today. We've opened up a lot of avenues of discussion as well. It's a huge, huge topic, and there's various aspects to discuss. But just briefly, to wrap up, Raveal, what would be the most important point for you?
Well, the most important point is that we have discussed this, that we always try to think about these things, you know, because this is important. Whatever life offers us or challenges us with, we have to find a response.
Right.
And without thinking what the right response will be, we can't do it. So I think that I congratulate the program that it picks up such topics, and I just hope that we more of them.
Okay, fantastic. Qudsi, turning to you, how would you like to wrap up the discussion today?
I think what it really comes down to is that things aren't very complicated when you look at them.
Okay.
They seem to be complicated, but if you exercise good moral virtues internally, and therefore if society also reflects those moral virtues, humility, dignity, tolerance, and the list goes on, and you use those things to inform your moral judgment, you may get things wrong here and there, and things may go wrong. It's not a perfect society. But if you can engender and instill that kind of approach to life, it's the approach that's important and the mentality that's important, then I think most problems will be solved or at least made better.
Okay, fantastic. And Makasa, what would be your concluding remarks for today?
Speak freely but responsibly. Simple as that.
Short and sweet, fantastic. Thank you very much. To the panel members, thank you very much for participating in the program as well, and the audience as well. I know there were a few other points we wanted to raise, but unfortunately we've run out of time. We've been speaking about freedom of speech, and you've got the freedom as well to come online, go to our website and actually put in your comments and views on the discussion. The website address is mta.tv/realtalk. You can email us in directly as well. The address is there for you at the bottom of the screen, realtalk@mta.tv. Do get in touch, do get involved. As we said before, you know, this is your program and we want you to be to feel really involved in it. If you want to be here in the audience, if you want to participate in future programs, all the details are there for you on the website as well, so do check that out. We'll be back, inshallah, with a few more Real Talk programs. We've got a few more topics lined up in the future. So inshallah, I hope you can join me again next time for that. But until then, assalamu alaikum.